Okay, greetings and welcome to another Pan-African Community News Update. I'm Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu, and I'm in the studio with Sister Oleander. Hopefully you can hear us there. Sister Oleander, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Greetings, everybody. Hope you're okay.
Likewise, excellent. Hope you're all there. Please give us a sound check, just to let us know that you can hear us and see us okay. We're going to do a review of the community-related news, basically everything that's taken place over the last fortnight. As ever, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and also share us. Share the link if you find that this broadcast is useful. It's quite fun when we have interactions during the live broadcast rather than afterwards. But I'm going to get started because, as usual, we have quite a lot to go through. And as usual, we're going to start with libations to those that have recently passed or notable anniversaries. And so the first libation, as is, seems to be happening all too frequently, is to our sister, or late sister and elder, Marlena Shaw. Now, you may know her for her beautiful rendition of California Soul. It's a 1969 hit that she had. She's often been sampled. She joined the Ancestors at the age of 81. She was born in New York. She first sang jazz in the clubs, in I think it was the mid-60s, before signing with a record label to record the Ashford and Simpson classic composition, California Soul. Now, I say famous and classic, and I don't use those words lightly. I mean, there's other songs that she did, even though that's the one that's the main one, because in many ways, this was popularized. Both her music and the voice was popularized because it was sampled on many songs by various hip hop producers like Gangsta, Ultramagnetic MCs, Ghostface. So there's quite a few. I think even Drake at one stage used a sample from her. So Marlena Shaw, we remember. Now, staying with a musical theme, the next libation is to the African-Jamaican singer, Pluto Shrevington. Now, he was known for hit songs like Ram Goat Liver, I'm Ambonia, and I don't know those other two, but I do know Your Honor, and he joined the Ancestors age 73. Now, he'd been living in Miami, Florida since the late 1980s, and this is, he moved after his huge successes. But in the 1980s in particular, he continued to write music and had this top 20 hit, Your Honor, which is the time he first came to mind for me. But many of us, maybe our parents or grandparents or those are friends and cousins, and be familiar with some of the older songs. But yes, we remember Pluto Shrevington. Now, the next libation is not musical related. This one is to our late elder Viola Plummer. Now, again, she joined the Ancestors at a good age, aged 86. She was the chairperson of the Brooklyn-based civil and human rights organization called December 12th Movement. She was one of those activists from a very young age. Actually, as a teenager, she became a staunch grassroots community advocate. She was organizing, fighting for our freedom, literally throughout most of her life. The last victory she saw was the signing of the reparations bill, which occurred last month when the state of New York finally, I don't know what they call it, that's New York State, but, finally agreed to look into the demands that she and others have been making for decades to examine the impact of slavery on African Americans in New York. Now, there is a really wonderful quote from Divine Allah, who's the youth minister of the New Black Panther Party in America. And she said that our Queen Elder Viola Plummer was a bold, fearless, uncompromising Black woman. She was our sister, mother, grandmother, and auntie, our powerful Black warrior queen. We are already missing her We are thankful that we knew her, though we are grateful that we were able to be led and taught by her. So that's her words, some powerful words that she's talking about there. Our elder herself once said, and this is a quote that I really like, she said, I didn't just want to be a witness. I wanted to be part of the movement. And I really loved that. We remember our elder, now ancestor, Viola Plummer, Asha. Sticking on the track with activists in our community. And the next we remember is to the amazing anti-colonial liberation fighter, Amilcar Cabral. Now, he was born in Guinea in 1956, and he helped form the MPLA, that's the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. He was also the co-founder of the African Party of Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde Islands. I think the acronym is POAIGC. It's a strange one, that one. But he was an amazing liberation fighter. He led the war against Portuguese colonialists, and he was a leader of those groups until his assassination. I mean, we can talk about it. In fact, I don't actually want to talk about his assassination. He was murdered in January 1973, killed by his own men as part of a coup against the Cape Verdean leadership of one of those groups. So this was an internal squabble that was born from colonialism, and no doubt we'll learn, as with Lumumba, as we learn with Sankara, that there'll be some nefarious interference that came from colonial states. But what I do want us to reflect on was his ideas and his philosophy. And one of the things that he was famous for was that he made the point of saying he did not want to replace European faces, in power with African faces. He wanted to dismantle imperialism. He wanted to dismantle capitalism and neocolonialism. And so he really wasn't about us becoming our enemy, becoming the same. Even though he was a great anti-colonial fighter, he wasn't interested in having a new flag and singing a new anthem. He just wanted to end all exploitation. He was an amazing political organizer, a revolutionary, and a poet as well as a fantastic human being. We remember. Then now the next one is in memoriam. Again, like with Amilcar Cabral, but this time we're going to close this section with the fantastic scholar activist, and that's probably the right term actually, Sojourner Truth, who in 1851, January the 25th, actually a couple of days ago, we are linking it to where we are now, addressed the first women's rights convention in Ohio. Now, many of us are now familiar with the term intersectionality, but she coined it before the scholar activist Kimberly Crenshaw did. And I pulled out the famous quote that you might have heard, and I thought I'd read it to you today. And it says that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I had ploughed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man, when I could get it and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 5 children and seen most of all sold to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? This is this is Ain't I a Woman. You can buy the book Ain't I a Woman and find out more about her philosophy and idea. I mean, this is the idea where feminist movements in America were kind of like champion the rights for women to vote, but they're excluding the voices of African women. And this is where the concept of intersectionality first arose in the public discourse. This is where it came back. It was from our amazing warrior queen, the scholar activist, Sojourner Truth. In fact, I'll read the last quote that she says, which always brings a little chuckle when I read it. It says, "If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it the right side up again. And I love that. I think we know that we're not going to get change in this world through a patriarchal system. We need those mighty women to kind of like work with us, those brothers who are interested and those other men who are interested in making the world a better place. So ancestor Sojourner Truth, we remember. You are watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're watching live, as ever, you are welcome to interact. You can join us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Again, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and all that sort of stuff that you do. If you find this broadcast useful, Sister Oleander is actually monitoring the chat. So, if you have something to say, question, comment, or libation, remember, these libations are our libations. So someone that you know is passed and you want to pour libation for them, or do it in the next program, let us know. But I'm going to now go through the next section of the program, when we look at the UK news and kind of things that are affecting, especially politics, our community. So I'm going to come back to this story which we've covered over the last couple of weeks, and this is the inquest into Chris Kabesa, and we know he's a young 13-year-old who lost his life after he was playing with a group of friends near a river in South Wales. Now, witnesses said that they saw a 14-year-old then push him as they're playing off a ledge which is 8 feet above the water, and he drowned. Now, the ongoing inquest, which we have talked about, is starting to draw towards a conclusion. The CPS and the coroner have decided that there was no evidence that Christopher's death was caused by any racially motivated action. Now, that's the decision that they've come to. But they've also used this word, and it's their word, not my word, that it was a prank. And I'm going to come back to that later on in the program. Now, the CPS decided not to charge the boy Jaden Pug, who was the other teenager who pushed him into the river. And they said that they used a two-stage test, which is, one, was there sufficient evidence for a charge, and two, was the prosecution in the public interest. And so I think it's clear that there was sufficient evidence because there's witnesses that saw it happen. And I think the boy himself doesn't deny it. But what's really galling is this idea that they're saying that a prosecution was not in the public interest. And we don't have time to really unpack that. But I will ask you to consider that there was a case recently of a teenager who tripped up a 62-year-old grandfather. And the police called that incident a tragic event, which started as a juvenile prank. Now, when I say he tripped up a 60-year-old grandfather, I should also continue, my bad, that the man had a heart attack as a result of that, and he did die. And so even though the police said it was a prank, what's happened is that that boy has been jailed for 12 months for manslaughter. So it does seem like for some teenagers, there's a decision that even if they recognize it's a prank, it's not in the public interest to prosecute. But depending on who's doing the pushing or who's losing their life, in this other instance, and I'm not going to say that this teenager who tripped up the 62-year-old was behaving in a good manner. They weren't, from what I've read. But there's this double standard here because this teenager has now been jailed for 12 months. Now, Alina Joseph, who is Chris's mother, has said that she's been forcibly denied the opportunity to grieve her son's death, and her fight for justice has been very painful and traumatic. And she also criticised decisions of the police police in South Wales, because she said she didn't trust the force because of the way her family had been treated in the past. And I think I shared some of the things that had happened previously when she called them out and they didn't respond, etc. like this. It's a really difficult case. There has been another case myself and Oleander were watching and talking about where there was two people who've been killed, stabbed violently by an African man, and the picture of him is not a flattering picture of him, which you'd expect as a mugshot. And the family have just called him evil. And I get the family's pain and anger, but the person who's the brother is suffering from schizophrenia. And so they haven't charged him with murder, they've charged him with manslaughter. And as much as I can understand the family's pain that he wasn't charged with murder, you know, he did have schizophrenia. He had been sectioned before, he had been violent before, he had assaulted police officers before, he was mentally unwell. And I think we've got to be careful when we call people who are mentally unwell evil. I think that's a little bit too harsh, but I do understand the family's in pain, and that's how they feel, and they have a right to feel how they feel. So I'm just saying that with this particular case, and I'm probably taking this story a little bit too long, there's a lot to think about. It's not as simple as just saying it was a prank and it's not in the public interest. It's always in the public interest, because we have to find ways to understand these dilemmas and manage them so that both the victims, the family of the victims, and the perpetrators are all kind of like, you know, dealt a fair hand, you know, an equitable hand. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is this one just irritates me. And when I say irritates me, it irritates me so much. This is the story of how the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum have made a loan arrangement with.
Toyin,
yeah.
I just wanted to say that we have a couple of comments, and the first one is Black History Walk. Greeting, boss man. Happy New Year. Got some good stuff coming up for you.
Oh, give thanks, brother. Happy New Year to you too. And I'm looking forward to joining you on the next walk.
And then the next comment is English Gal 234. Greetings. I'm British Jamaican, but in the States now. Love the coverage by Legali.
Oh, give thanks. I'm glad we're reaching across the pond as well. So that's good. This is a quick way to keep in touch with what's going on, because if you watch the news over here, we've got some amazing journalists, you know, but the platforms themselves are still very problematic. So give thanks, and thank you for joining us and making comments. I want to continue with this story here. This is the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum. You know, this is a topic that's close to my heart, because they've made a so-called loan arrangement with the Manhaya Palace Museum in Kumasi, and that's the capital of what was once the Ashanti Empire. Now we talk about the Asante. But with this so-called loan arrangement, 32 items, gold items, that was held in the collections, I would say illegally, of those two museums. And they were also primarily, I say illegally because they were primarily looted during the British colonial era, have been given back to Ghana. But the museums claim that they're not able to legally deaccession the objects, and deaccession is a fancy word for saying take it out of their catalogue and give possession over to the rightful owners. And they'll argue, and there's a I think it's a royal the Royal Charter, some nonsense, that the trustees are not permitted to deaccession objects. The thing is, however, of course, they can just change that. You know, they can just ask the Charles boy and say, "Hey, King Charles, change this, get the politicians to write it, draft it." But obviously this is the problem that the British Museum and the V&A had. I remember talking about this with the Ethiopian artifacts at the V&A. That's when that racist boy, the one who made the racist slurs against Khan during the election campaign, I've forgotten his name, Tristan Hunt. That's when he was carrying on with this. But the good thing is, of course, is that these artifacts, these cultural artifacts, are returning back to Ghana, where they belong. You know, would I give them back after the so-called loan period? Maybe I'm a bit of bad character. I don't know. I wouldn't. But it's worth remembering that there are other African restitution claims against the British Museum and the V&A, particularly those from Nigeria and Ethiopia. And, you know, this is an ongoing story. So it is a good news in one way, but it's only, we must never see it as a gift of the British to us. That's not what it is. It's thieves returning the goods, but still pretending that they own the goods. It's a bizarre one. And if you want to understand a little bit more about it, there is a video called the Walk that Legali made, which kind of covers the story a little bit. It's on YouTube from a Pan-African perspective and the British Museum. Sister Oleander.
Yes, there's a couple of comments from Del Smith. Firstly, she says I think it's a she. I hope I'm getting that right. They have taken the exclusive the language. I think she means excuse the language, Brother Toyin, regarding the museum. Then she says, yeah, excuse the language. No loan and keep them Russ.
Exactly. That's what I would. But you know what? I'm supposed to be a responsible adult. But
Yeah.
then take it from us,
So
they teeth it from us. We're just reclaiming it. I don't understand. But you know what? Nation states. I mean, you can see the two kings in the photograph. You know, they like to have these kind of like reciprocal, polite society agreements, kind of thing. And
photo opportunity.
yeah, I mean that's it. But let me move on with the next story. I know we've got a lot to go through. Thank you for the comments, and of course, like I said, please keep coming with the comments and questions as well, and anything like that. We're good to go. So, on a similar theme, going back, that one was talking about looted artifacts during the colonial era. Well, let's go back to looted peoples and kidnapped peoples and murdered, raped peoples. I'm talking about African people during the enslavement period. And what we have here now is a very strange story. This is where it's strange. If I don't sound like good stories, because they're factual stories, the news is not really supposed to be about good or bad in a sense, but I try to be positive. This one is about an appeal from the University of West Indies, who are asking for people. And when I say people, they're obviously referring to people who are enslavers or from enslaver families. So they're asking for their family records from the early days of African enslavement. And they want them to share it with them from an online archive. Now, this project is run by the University of West Indies. They're saying that, you know, this is a way that people can actually then start tracing their heritage. It's kind of similar to what the London, what was it called? The London, you know what? This is so bad. I was on the project. The database we had at UCL, the legacies of British slavery, LBS. It's like, you know what? I'm getting old. So there's an amazing archive. Yes, I'm a bit biased on online, which you can access the legacies of British slavery, where a group of scholars, Draper, I mean, there were so many of them, you know, Kate Donington, you know, Kirsty Ward, I mean, British, you know, Hackney Museum, all involved, myself, Akala, we all, you know, we kind of like worked on this project together, getting all the names of people who got the compensation from the British state and traced it to find out where the money went. You can still go to it now and find out which families were involved in enslavement, which ones empowered it. So what UE, the University of West Indies, is trying to do is kind of copy that backwards in a different way. They're trying to get family records donated so that, you know, those of us who have direct links to the Caribbean can actually trace or try to trace our ancestry, trace our roots. And the reason why you see two faces on the screen, the first face you see is the former BBC journalist Laura Trevelyan, and you're probably familiar. We've spoken about her, you know, last year. You know, she was someone from slavery. You know, her family was involved in enslavement. She made, I think, £20,000 donation. But what's happening is that she's now been appointed an honorary associate fellow at UWE's PJ Patterson's Institute for Africa, Caribbean Advocacy, and she's actually working on this project now. You know, she founded, let me just give you context. She also founded a group called the Ears of Slavery. And they're a group of, you know, well-meaning Europeans who have found out that they've got a history, you know, in their background of slavery in their families. And they're trying to kind of like keep the topic of reparations at the forefront of people's minds. And that's a good thing. I don't question that. And on this particular issue, they say this is an important reparative project that will give descendants of enslaved Africans in the various diasporas invaluable access to information about their ancestors. And how can I challenge that? And I do support them on that. But the reason why you can see another face on the screen, and that's of our wonderful sister, Esther Stafford Halsey, is that she recently spoke to the Voice newspaper. I think I'm in the same article in November, and asked about these kind of things, because there was a reparations conference put on by our lovely sister Belle Ribeiro. And she's actually saying we've got to be careful. And I think I did speak about this. We're getting to a position now where the descendants of enslavers are now being enabled to claim center stage in the narrative. And I'm saying that actually it's getting further than that. We're actually getting a position where they're almost hijacking the reparations movement. Their faces are synonymous with African reparations, at least from the British perspective. That's what's starting to happen. And Africans are being moved out of that story, and other people are talking our business. I mean, her being an honorary associate for African Caribbean advocacy in the Caribbean, it sounds a little bit, I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't help. I'm not saying it's not welcome. Just be mindful with these kind of moves. And I'm going to give you another story. The next story builds upon this, for the reason why I'm concerned about it. Sister Oleander.
I have a couple of comments. First from N, Grand Rising African Family. Brother Toyin, love this channel, very informative and vital for our community. At last, regular updates from an African perspective.
Give thanks. We appreciate it. We're trying our best.
Yeah. And the next comment, sorry, there's just two. English Girl 234 says, will you be covering the increasing poverty rate in Britain and what can be done to remedy the situation?
Good question. I haven't actually, I don't think there's something that talks explicitly about that, but I can mention it. I know there's a story about the political focus that's taking place this year when there's an election due. And I can kind of like talk about that poverty angle a bit later on, if you don't mind. I'll come to it on there. But I'll give thanks, and that's a very good question, because the inequity between rich and poor in the UK has shot through the roof, and it keeps getting bigger. So people talk about a cost of living crisis, but it's actually it's a cost of like a profit. It's a cost of profiteering crisis. But I'll come to that. Give thanks for the question. So the next story that I want to talk about, which is related to that one, is actually about an academic project. It's a report which has been done by the dual heritage author Malik Al-Nasir. Now, he's done some research into a slaver family for his doctorate, which he claims and he states it was also deeply personal. Now, he's studying at the University of Cambridge, and during the process of his research, he's uncovered missing parts of his own family history connected to his father's birthplace in Guyana. He found out that some of his ancestors were slavers while others were enslaved. Now, this is always a traumatic thing for any individual to find out. The history of African people and other people in Guyana is quite complex. But what he wants to do is establish a center for colonial research and develop a doctoral training partnerships for African British or British African researchers and Caribbean academics. It's a noble project. What I like about this story is that we're starting to see researchers based in the UK using their resources of their universities. So, I'm at UCL, he's at Cambridge, we had those in Bristol, starting to use those resources to uncover the history that's been excluded, that's been hidden, that's been deformed and, used to beat us over the head with. Now we're getting to the truth. And it's something we can leave to the next generation so that they can continue on the reparations struggles. This is not just, for the longest time, reparations was just seen as an American movement. It's something that Africans in the States would run. But no, we should be working. In fact, not we should be. We are working with NCOPA, but we are working with those organizations. And, but we all have distinctive claims. One of the things that annoys me sometimes when I hear different Pan-Africanists talking about reparations is that they tend to look at it from their own national perspective rather than as a global perspective. The nation states that we found ourselves in, where the ancestors have placed us, are not really our spiritual homes. That's where we have ended up in the diaspora. And, so when we are talking about reparations, even though we are specialists in the areas where we reside, the long-term strategy is a holistic plan, which means that we have to unite all of those struggles. And then that's when we start talking about justice. So I just want to remind you, in the UK, I think it was last April, that clown, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, refused to apologize for the country's role in the enslavement of African people, and he ruled out any issue of reparations. So remember, just because he's an Asian man doesn't mean that he's going to have sympathy with us or empathy with us. Same thing like the whole Kemi Badenoch or the, what's his name, Kwasi Kwarteng, they are not on our side. So we have to do the research. We have to do the work. We have to make the case. And that's what we're doing. Next story. This is a tragic one. I did struggle about whether to put it inside the We Remember, etc. But you know, it's got a news element to it. And when I do the We Remember section, which is a libation section, I don't really want to go into news. So there's a tragic story of our brother Wayne Brown. He was the chief of the West Midlands Fire Service, and he was found. Well, he passed at his home in Birmingham. The police have said there's nothing suspicious. They, he, what I mean, what can I say? But the news angle is the thing that's quite sad. That I didn't really want to go into, but you know me, I'm very transparent when it comes to our people. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. He was reportedly being investigated over claims about his academic qualifications. Now, this doesn't take away from the excellent work that he did while he was the chief of the Westminster Fire Service, but you know, he spent 27 years in the London Fire Brigade, and this before rising to assistant commissioner. So he's got a sterling career, and I think people who have worked with him, who know him, know the work he's done. I don't know him personally, but I haven't heard anyone badmouth him to me. But what's happened, and if you think about what happened with our sister, I've forgotten her name, Gray, in Harvard. I've forgotten her first name, Toyin, the one who they hounded out, you know, claiming she was anti-Semitic, and then went through her thesis trying to find plagiarism. Well, what they did something similar here. And before, you know, the police found his body, he was being investigated, saying that on his application for his role, which is a senior role in the West Midlands Fire Service, there was a requirement that said that he had to hold an MBA or equivalent. And it looks like on his application form, he said he had an MBA in business or something like that. But when they contacted the university, they said, no, he applied, he asked questions, and there's emails saying that he was interested in it, but he didn't actually do it. And so I think that's the reason why, you know, this is still going. And, you know, some people are speculating that bringing this all up and trying to shame him is maybe a reason why perhaps, you know, this was a case of suicide. We don't know, but what we do want to do is remember him and thank him for his service to all those people.
We have a comment from English Girl, and she says Claudine Gay. I think that's the person.
Thank you. Yes, Claudine. Thank you. My memory sometimes slips. Yes. Okay. So the next story is actually the next section, I should say. The next section is when we're going to look at some of the politics that takes place in the UK, but I'll do the usual. As if you're just joining us now, you're watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. My name is Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. In the studio with Sister Oleander. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. So please don't forget, you can drop comments, you can subscribe, you can like, share, all the usual stuff. And I'm going to keep going through because we've got quite a lot to cover over the last about things that have happened over the last 2 weeks. So the first story I'm going to talk about, and this one will come back and I'll touch upon a comment made by English Girl, is a couple of articles, an article and a report. So one article by the organization Open Democracy, and they've actually made a really good point that the competition between Conservative and Labour over hardline immigration policies is actually mainstreaming far-right ideas through something we call populism. I don't know if you know about populism. Populism is when politicians make this straw man argument about that they are not the corrupt entities. They're not, they're politicians. They are honourable people. But there's an elite, and you know they have to fight the elite. And they do things on the will of the people. So they're doing what the people want, but they're trying to get rid of the elite. And you heard this with the orange one in the White House a few years back when he talked about draining the swamp. So he was the virtuous one coming to get rid of all the corrupt politicians and lead America and make it great again. Well, in the UK, we had a similar thing when you hear the Rishi Sunaks and the Boris Johnsons of the world saying, we're taking our sovereignty back from those pesky foreign courts in Brussels. This is complete nonsense, right? You know, and Sunak does the same thing when he says the British people want me to get a grip on immigration, and I'm going to stop the boats. This is populism. But what's happened, because they're all doing it, because you can't tell the difference between Conservative and Labour at this particular moment in time. They are pretty much the same party because they're all doing it. What used to be called far-right ideology is actually just being mainstream. It's normal. And that's very, very dangerous because it means that when extreme things happen, people just turn a blind eye. They turn the other cheek. It's like, oh, what else is new? And then that escalates and escalates. And so it takes something like a terrorist explosion or something really extreme before we start seeing, people put into measures things to protect minority communities and those who are the most vulnerable. So it's a really good read if you're interested in that one. And the other paper, which is a good read, is that from the Runnymede Trust report called Creating a Crisis, Immigration, Racism, and the 2024 General Election. And I say this is it's a good read. And it's timely right now because if you think about where we are this year, we have a British general election. I think Sunak has said around November. You have an American election around the same time. And it looks like the orange one, that's Donald Trump, will be on the ballot. So you're going to have two, Biden and Trump. What's the difference when it comes to things like their policies on Palestine? And you have the European Union is going to have an election. The UK is outside the European Union, so we can't influence that as citizens. But what we should know is that everything that takes place amongst this in this political world is going to have an impact on us wherever we're living. Now, the Runnymede Trust is really good because its report talks about how the Prime Minister's summoning of the people to push through inhumane and unpopular policies is an abuse of populism. It uses this in a different way, and the government has now become associated with that. People expect it, and this is where the point that English Gal was really correct about, because in the middle of that slide you can see a chart. And in the chart, I'll try and make it bigger for you actually. If you can see in the chart and you can see the figures in there, it's telling you about what are the two most important issues facing the UK at the moment. And if you look at it, the number one is immigration. After that is things like unemployment and all the other features, and let alone poverty, cost of living. But immigration is actually number one. And the reality of the situation is that it's like, that's a madness. Immigration is not the biggest problem, or more cause that should be politicians champion on behalf of the British public in 2024. It should be energy bills. It should be cost of living. It should be inequality. It should be, like racism and structural racism. But instead, what's happening is that because these politicians, and I'm talking about Labour and Conservative, are playing around with these so-called far-right ideas, which I said, it's just pure racism. And what's happening is that they've been empowered to make illiberal laws where they criminalize protest, where they try to sidestep human rights. So this is why this is an important issue right now. And so I thought, if you get a chance, you can download them. They're both accessible. The article and the report are both accessible online. Okay, so the next slide is to, it's still on the same theme. If you think about the nightmare that the British public faced when it had Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, now we have James Cleverly. I would argue that things have only got marginally better. I think they're both cut from the same cloth. And it's not just me who thinks that, because what you may remember is that Suella Braverman actually issued a review into British policing saying that they'd gone too woke. And so she wanted the police to investigate, or they wanted this review to investigate how woke the police were. But what's happened is that the head of the British police racism watchdog, his name's Nick Glynn, he issued the politicians with a warning. So the whole thing backfired. And he said to James Cleverly that he must not repeat the same racist tropes and terminology as Suella Braverman. So it's a complete reverse, a complete backfire. They were hoping to find evidence of police officers taking a knee or doing anti-racist training and trying to say that these things are bad and they can defund them. Well, actually, the police are saying, no, we have a problem. Remember, Gavin Stevens, the head of British police chiefs, recently just said that he believes that policing is institutional racist, right? So we know that the police themselves recognize it. But the politicians, the political class, they're still trying to hide and pretend that, that so-called woke policing is a problem. I hate the way that they abuse the word woke. It really pees me off. So this is an important story. Also remember that this Home Secretary, Mr. Cleverly, was recently under fire for making so-called jokes about date rape drugging. I mean, this is the moral quality of politicians of today's generation. I mean, it makes me sick. The intellectual capacity, the moral values are so low. The bar is so low right now. But anyway, I'll move on. Now, the next story, I'm probably going to be a little bit unpopular with what I'm going to say, is that there's a new campaign that's come out to improve the Windrush compensation scheme. And I said compensation scheme, not reparation scheme. And I'm glad that there's a new campaign that's out. It's very good. And it's been triggered because I don't even remember, we spoke about this in the last program, Rishi Sunak has announced a new compensation plan of around £1 billion for victims of the post office scandal. Don't get confused. They keep saying Horizon IT, but this is not, Fujitsu's problem. The problem is actually the British Post Office and them being willing to actually believe the worst of postmasters in the UK. But that's another discussion for another day. But with this compensation payout, the £1 billion that Rishi Sunak has done, just like that, right? Over 2,000 people are to receive between around £44,000 or get an upfront government payment of £75,000. That's only to those who were affected by the scandal but not convicted. If you were convicted by the scandal, then you would be eligible for up to £600,000 compensation payment. £600,000. The British government's actually going to pass legislation that's going to overturn the convictions of everyone that was involved in that. Now, they've said, we know that some people who are guilty will will be freed, but it's only right that they do so. I have issues with that as well. I'm not saying that the conviction shouldn't be overturned, but just by doing it on a blanket way is another issue. But, the reason why this is on this program, which is looking at Pan-African issues, is because we have to remember that the Windrush compensation scheme was set up in 2019. And even to this very day, they've only paid out £75 million. So just like that, they're going to pay £1 billion for the victims of the post office scandal. But for the Windrush scandal, they've only paid out £75 million. And even then, only 13% of the people who have been paid, who've been waiting to be paid, have received their payment within 12 months. It's been taking over a year for them to be processed. We've spoken about how people have lost their lives since waiting with their claims. And now we're hearing a lot of civil society, a lot of the people in the media, some of our media personalities coming out and saying, I think Annie Lennox is joining the campaign, saying like, look, do better. This is racism. Dory Knotts, this is racism. This is racism. Well, we know it's racism. And this is something that the reason why I'm annoyed about this is because, again, just like I spoke about Laura Trevelyan in the other story, part of this campaign is being led by Martin Ford. And Martin Ford, the guy you can see up there, he's what is called KC, King's Counsel. He set up the compensation scheme. I mean, now he's making all the right noises and saying how bad it is and it's not right and it needs to be independent. But I remember when I was engaged in those discussions and I challenged him publicly about this. And I said, look, this scheme, I've looked at, I've read all the policies and it ain't going to work the way it is. There's too many caveats. And I remember this right when the whole thing started with the compensation scheme. And they came back with the same thing that Trevor Phillips did with me. The same thing. They don't like it when I challenge them on these levels, on an academic level, on an intellectual level. He came back with the same nonsense about kind of having to grow up, we can't pay everyone out. And now the same people who designed the system, who look like us, are complaining and campaigning and leading the fight for us. I get vexed with things like that. But this is a news program, so I shouldn't really vent too much today, but it does annoy me. But just remember where this starts from. This starts from the whole idea that actually African people came from what they call perversely the Commonwealth. So they came from the Caribbean, they came from the continent, and they were deemed as illegal immigrants. The same language that we're hearing now, The same language was not only challenging like economic migrants, like my parent and Sister Oleander's parents. I'm proud that my dad had that courage to make a new world. Make a new life for him. But they're challenging asylum seekers, man. They're challenging refugees. But what they did with our parents, our grandparents, was that they denied them access to work, healthcare, benefits, and they started deporting them despite them having the legal right to be in the UK. So I don't have sympathy for anyone who was on the wrong side of that discussion. No one. So, I mean, anyway, let me just leave it there because I'm going to cover that. Again, there's another slide I want to talk about as well. Sister
Okay, so yes, so we have a comment from FP Comms. What about the compensation for Grenfell too? Does this also fall in the same category?
Exactly, it falls in the same category. This is thank you for that question, because what's happened with Grenfell, you see, this is the thing that's going to make me really unpopular, and I don't have any evidence for this. I just have a gut instinct on this, right? We know why Windrush, why that happened, why the scandals happened, why the inquiry, why all the resulting noise that's happened. We still haven't seen like justice. It's because those who are affected came from Africa, they came from Asia, they came from it's our people. It's pure straight out structural racism. The same thing with Grenfell. Grenfell's a more complex case because then you have class mixed in that. The people in there were working class. Some of them were migrants, some of them were Muslims, some of them were African, some of them were European. They came from Eastern Europe, they came from all over. And so they weren't seen as good enough. They shouldn't even be living in the borough of Kensington and Chelsea. So there's another reason why they're being taking a mick with them. And it's disgusting that this continued inquiries taking place. This week they had the statements from the families and survivors. But what's happening is taking place, but the criminal investigation has been on pause while the inquiry is going on. So no one has been arrested for it. In fact, the only people who have been arrested for it are people who have been engaged in little bits of frauds, little bit of scams and stuff like that. Ironically, some of them coming from our community, but none of the people who are responsible for the murder of those people have been compensated or received any kind of reparatory justice. Only the families have been moved and rehoused finally after all the and you remember how long it took for that to happen. But with this post office scandal, you've got to remember there's a slight difference here. And I don't get me wrong, I believe they deserve justice, because I know what I'm going to say is going to be really upsetting for some people. They definitely deserve justice. But the reason I believe there's a slight difference in their treatment is because the people involved in here, forget the TV program, is that it's a mixture of people of European heritage and people of Indian heritage. And I know that's a controversial statement to say, not Bangladeshi, not Pakistani, but Indian heritage. And right now in the British government, the elite that is running things is those of Indian heritage. Now, of course, I'm not saying that people of Indian heritage are bad or anything. I'm just saying that there is, that I don't want to talk about caste, that's another issue, but there is bias. And so I think people like Sunak, I think people like Patel, I think people like Braverman, I think, those that tied up with the fact that it's also affecting people of English or European heritage has actually meant that they could empathize more with those people caught up in the post office scandal. If it was people from the continent or from the Caribbean or from Bangladesh or from Pakistan that was running post offices, I'm telling you, that £1 billion compensation deal wouldn't be on the table. That's my gut instinct. But that's another big thing and stuff. I haven't got any evidence for this. This is just a gut instinct, knowing, living in the belly of the beast for so long, you kind of know how certain things move. Let me move on because I'm keeping that story a little bit too long. The next story is linked to this one, and I'll speed through it quickly because this is, again, just to remind you of how complex this is and how the narrative has been hijacked. So when we hear about the Windrush scandal, we only hear about those who came on the Windrush generally. We don't hear about people from different islands. We don't hear about people from different continents. But I just want to remind you that in 2023, there were more than 2,000 claims where victims of this, what they call the Windrush scandal, received zero. No money whatsoever. This is despite the government guarantee that anyone who is eligible would receive full compensation. And they said that at least 5 years ago. And in the screen, I want to give you an example of the late elder Taiwo Abiona. Because, when we hear about the Windrush scandal, the way the media frames it, the way the politicians frame it, they frame it as if there isn't no Barbados, like there is no Guyana, like there isn't no Trinidad. Everything's coming from Jamaica. But actually, no, the Windrush scandal hit everyone. And the late, elder Taiwo Obiano, he worked as a postman for the Royal Mail, and he got his British passport in the 1960s after arriving from Nigeria. Now it's just like my dad. My dad worked for British Telecom. He came in the 1960s from Nigeria. But you see, what happened with our elder, just like what would have happened to my dad if he didn't become an ancestor, was that when he went to renew his passport, he was told he was no longer a British citizen. So his son had to try and fight with him to try and find out what was going on. But what happened was that his father passed away 2 weeks after the fight. They kept on fighting, and the Home Office eventually said that he could stay in the UK. So his father had to fight for his citizenship, despite being in the country for so long, since the 1960s. And then just 2 weeks after being told, he became an ancestor, he passed. And you know what this stinking country did? Or those, not the country, I'm talking about the political elite in the country, but the stinking people in the power in this country did? They chucked him $5,000 for his funeral. Yeah, it's $5,000. Bury him, man. That's it. This is anyway, remember, it was Amber Rudd, the former lover of Kwasi Kwarteng, and what's her name, former PM Theresa May, who created the hostile environment. Most Labour MPs around the time, they did jack. I mean, when people like Dawn Butler were talking up, calling Boris Johnson a liar, you know what I mean? The others were just silent. So, I'm grateful there's a new campaign. I'm grateful that musicians and actors and artists are all coming in to ask for more compensation. But what we need is reparation. That's the only way to deal with this kind of madness. I'm going to move to the next section because I'm getting vexed. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, so we've got a comment from FP Comms. And she says, this sounds like the dynamics we have in Guyana. So what you say is a very good gut instinct, the African and Asian divide. That's your comment on the post office and etc.
Thank you. Yeah, because I mean, just so people know, is like there was a time when there was a tight unity like this between African and Asian communities in the UK. When they started calling us BME, Black and Minority Ethnic, the Black was actually talking about African and Asian people together. But what happened was that there was a separation. They played divide and rule. And so that's how the BAME came in. It became Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic. And so, all of a sudden, it's like, they started to move some people of South Asian heritage up the ranks and started telling them, you don't want to be associated with us. It's like, it's like, and then they started even divisions in then. So they started moving it. So it was Black and Minority Ethnic. In fact, no, before that, it became Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic, and Refugee. So it was BAME. I remember that. BAME must have lasted for around a year. And then they just ducked off the refugees and stuck with BAME. And now we have people saying, get rid of BAME. Should be using any of those stupid terms. But what's happened is that the unity that existed between minority ethnic groups in the UK has been under sustained attack. And those people who have benefited from that, from those attacks and have moved forward, haven't shown solidarity. They're pulled up the ladder behind them. And sadly, there are many of us from our community that have also been carrying on in those kind of ways. And it breaks my heart. But unfortunately, that's how capitalism works. That's how imperialism, colonial thinking thinks. Okay, so you're watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. The next section, if you thought that was the next one, the next section is on Afrophobia and white supremacy. So I hope you got some Valium. No, so I shouldn't say that. No drugs. Peppermint tea. Just chill out. Peppermint tea. We're going to speed through because we've got a lot to go through. And I know the time is running, and I'm trying to not make the program as long. I'm only halfway through. If you're watching live, you are welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share if you find the broadcast useful. But let's get started. So the first story, this man here, I say man, that's me being very kind. This racist Christian Jopling, 28, father of two, was convicted after attacking a cleaner in a Gateshead hotel after gouging out his eyes and punching him. Now, the person he attacked was a cleaner. This happened last January around 10 a.m. in the morning. Jopling, who's a groundsman, rushed out of his room and asked him, what was he looking at, before heading towards a lift. when a worker, the person he attacked, they haven't given us ethnicity of the person he attacked. I can only assume it's an African or Asian. Later walked past Jopling on a stairwell. He was called in a highly offensive racist name. And when he was questioned, so the man said, "Did you use the word? Did you use that word?" This guy, Jopling, punched him in the face and tried to drag him into the lift. What he would have done if he dragged him into the lift, we don't know. But while he punched him in the face and got him to the floor, he put his thumbs in his eyes and pressed them with force so much that there was blood coming out, and then he repeatedly punched him. Now, what happened is that the deputy manager of the hotel became aware of the attack, turned up at the scene after seeing blood all over the victim's face. But then what Jopling did was that he armed himself with a vodka bottle and ran towards both the man and the hotel manager. Now, this eventually, he was arrested. He admitted to his crimes, this is the court case that's running through now. I don't know. I haven't heard of if there's been any sentencing. I think he's been charged, but I think there's not been a sentencing. But this is, this is where we're at, right? 2024. Next story, Sam Melia. Now, the person that you can see on the far, I was going to say that on the far left. It's quite ironic, far left or far right. The person at the top on the right, that's Sam Melia. I'll explain who the other one in the vest is. Sam Melia is a white supremacist who was leader of a group called the 100 Handers. Now, he has been found guilty of stirring up racial hatred. The 34-year-old is a sign maker by trade. He's also a member of a group called the Patriotic Alternative, which is one of the UK's largest right-wing organisations. I say right-wing organisations, they say far-right organisations. I'm going to start phasing out the term far-right and just say right-wing because they're the same. Now, the investigators found that the 100 Handers had actually more than 3,500 followers online. And what the group did was that they plastered lampposts, walls, and even primary schools with these racist, divisive stickers. They were, they were just discussing anti-migrant, anti-African, Afrophobia, anti-Semitic, the whole lot. Now, in court, Melia clung to his views. He said that actually, these are my beliefs. I'm pro-British and a white advocate. That's how he defined himself. And he said that this is a matter of free speech. He has the right to his beliefs. He has the right to put those stickers in schools, on lampposts, whatever. But yes, he's been found guilty. The person on the side, the reason I just wanted to remind you of how common this is now, is that last year, this person on the side is Christopher Kearney. He's another member of Patriotic Alternative, and he was jailed for promoting terrorism. Now, that guy was a former paratrooper. So we often talk about the police being a haven of white supremacists, but we sometimes forget that the British Army creates them as well. And it's very interesting because right now we're hearing talk about conscription. We're having politicians saying that they're thinking about forcing children to join the British Army. And in the UK has the lowest age of cadets. I think it's 16 in the UK, whereas everywhere else is 18. That children can actually join the army. So I'll leave that disgusting story there. 2024. Where are we now? Okay, this is a good bad news story. This is something to think about. It's there's been some research into why. Oh, Sister Oleander.
We have some greetings from Reparation Nation plus Black Central Bank Construction.
Greetings, Reparation Nation. Thank you. And so what's this story? Okay, so this one is just a little bit of history really about how the requirement for unanimous jury verdicts in criminal cases became abolished. Now, this took place in 1967, and it marked really what's a massive departure from a centuries-old legal tradition in the UK. Now, some people think, well, isn't that a good thing that rather than having a unanimous jury verdict, that now we can have majority verdicts? Well, the police argued that it was to prevent what they called nobbling, and this is where you'd have gangsters kind of like finding a jury member and threatening their family, and so they'd have one person who would not vote with their conscience because they're petrified. But there's been some empirical research from the US that actually says that no, when juries are required to achieve unanimity, when they have to come to unanimous verdict, they actually deliberate much more thoroughly because they know they can't get away with just a majority, verdict. So they have to think things through. And what the US Supreme Court found out was that where there was evidence, where there was evidence of majority verdicts, then what happened was that they led to disproportionate numbers of miscarriages of justice where people were being exonerated later on. So the reason why I'm raising this now is because this research that's just taken place in the UK has indicated that the reason why the UK has done this is not because of just to prevent nobbling, but really for class and racist issues. There were concerns that by having African people as part of the jury, then what happened was that the quality of the verdicts being delivered was not going to be to their favor. And a perfect example, and you can see the image of Winston True there, is that he was one of the Oval Four, and he was cleared in 2019 after being wrongly convicted by the racist police officer Derek Ridgewell. I'm going to talk about him in a few minutes. Now, he was convicted through a majority verdict by a jury that was 10 to 2 in favor of his conviction. But what our brother Winston True said is that he's always wondered whether the two Africans who were on the jury were the ones who actually didn't believe the racist police, and the other 10 were the ones that did. And so what we're learning from this and what this report says, and I'll put, if you look at the image, you can download, well, actually you can't download the report because it's behind the academic paywall, but if you want it, I can find it, forward it to you. Someone will forward it to you. Majority verdicts are more likely to silence the voice of the jurors from minority groups. And that's where that is. I know it's a bit of a complex story, but that's what that is. It's like, it's not saying that there's going to be a change back to unanimous jury verdicts, but at least now we know the rationale for why that's taking place, why that shift took place. And we're seeing it in play now. So, that was an important piece of research. This story is not UK police, and we're going to have a quick section on UK police. But this story is about Theo Luhaka, and he was left disabled and suffering severe injuries in his anal region from a police baton, as well as wounds to his head during a stop and search in Paris during 2017. This case rocked France. Marc-Antoine Castellain, 34-year-old police officer, was found guilty of the truncheon blow that injured our brother, but he received a 12-month suspended prison sentence. So, I think he was sprayed with, tear gas, and then he put a truncheon, in his regions, and caused a 4-inch laceration in the region. Now, 12-month suspended prison sentence, police officer. His colleagues, Jeremy Dunlin and Tony Hochart, received 3-month suspended terms at the end of a 10-day trial. Now, prosecutors had asked for a 3-year jail term, but obviously they didn't get it. I don't know. The court rejected the charge of deliberate violence resulting in permanent mutilation or infirmity. This is the reason why we have to look at how the legal system is constructed. We have to see how the sentencing laws, jury, all those things impact on whether we can get justice in the legal system in the West. In fact, it's not even just the West, it's a global problem, but particularly this is a program looking at the UK. I'm going to leave that there, just something to think about. Sometimes we do get justice. This is a story about a tribunal that found that our sister Andrea Mears, who was a teacher at a primary school for some 20 years in Stretford, she claimed that she was a victim of, she uses the language blackophobia, and as much as it's not quite right, I'm really happy to hear that it's Afrophobia to be there, Afrophobia, you know. So we're starting to get it, right? She won the case because she, you know, we're starting to get it. It's not anti-black racism. It's not blackophobia. It's Afrophobia, but she won the case. She was targeted and unfairly sacked because she regularly complained about racist language at a primary school. The staff, her colleagues, threatened a wildcat strike if she returned after sick leave. 6 of her colleagues ganged up and complained about her. She won. You can download the tribunal reading. It's a litany of complaints. Things from, you know, having presentations where African children have got the labels monkey, and she's challenging that. And I mean, it's just, I mean, you know, some of the stuff I'm not so sure, but it was a load of stuff that she raised, and they just couldn't take it. They couldn't take the fact that she challenged their Afrophobia, and they sacked her. And now that the tribunal found that it was an unfair dismissal. So I'm happy for that. The system does work. But check this, right? Tribunals work to a different standard than criminal courts. So with tribunal, you have people who are on, you know, sit on the panel who are what we call lay members. And that's like you and I, people who just want to see justice, who just want to do the right thing. You know, we're not trying to keep the system going. We're looking at the facts and saying, right, you know what, actually, nah, it's obvious that they're ganging up on her. So give thanks. That's a good news story. I mean, but obviously it's not in the good news section, but you know, that's a good one. The next story, again, it's another good news story, but you know, it's just a reminder that it's not just in education, but it's also in the healthcare. This is the article talking about a story about a nurse in, I think it's a Paddington hospital, called Kinga Lesniak. And she's been struck off the medical register after it's found that she called African colleagues the N-word and other offensive racist comments. Sister Oleander, did you want to say something?
Yes, so we have a comment from FP Comms saying, sorry to keep commenting. You don't need to apologize, sis. But I love what you said about jury convictions. I found that the chairperson of the jury usually has very strong views, and with majority verdicts, you silence the introverts.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened with the Rashawn Charles inquest. I was there. You know, I remember I was there with the family, and one of the members on the panel, the jury, was a father of a serving police officer. And so what happened? Not only was the judge, I don't think they used the word judge, the coroner, that's it, guiding the panel or the jury what decision to make, but you also had someone who was really strongly pro-police telling them, don't find him guilty. And so that's what happened. So that, you know, that's another issue. But here, this is a good case, and give thanks for that, sister. Here is you know, we see the nursing and midwifery council acknowledging that Lesniak's comments had, and they used the words, a deep-seated attitudinal problem and an entrenched contempt towards African people, and it jeopardized the safety of patients. So the council's panel wrote, your misconduct was so deplorable that it could discourage members of the public, especially members of the Black community, from seeking access to clinical care when required. A well-informed member of the public may be reluctant to receive clinical care if they were aware that a member of the nursing profession had exhibited such racist conduct as you had chosen to do so. So I'm glad that she has been struck off the medical register. She shouldn't have been there in the first place. And so we have the same issue about vetting, which we constantly hear when we talk about the police members. That's also happening in the medical sector.
Yeah, and we have another comment from Marlon Lee Moncrief. Well, it's actually not a comment, it's a few emojis, and I think that's greetings to us.
Greetings. Good to have you with us. Give thanks. Okay, so let me continue on. Okay, the next story is, I was talking about immigration, you know, I was talking about refugees and migration. Well, here we have a ridiculous case where, you know, just so you understand how it impacts people at a family level. So you have UK recruiting people from across the world, from Africa, from Asia, from all over the world, from, you know, to come and serve in the NHS and social care and do the work that many people here don't want to do. So a lot of single women have come over to work in the US, in the UK. And Juliet McPenny, as you can see, the 37-year-old from Zimbabwe, she came last May. She's working as a living carer. But then when she's trying to ask for her son to come over, her 13-year-old son, her teenage son, she's been refused a visa. They're saying that, you know, there's no reason, there's no, you know, he can't come. And this is despite there being current rules permitting healthcare workers to bring family members. What they're saying is that actually you can only bring family members over to the UK if you are in a couple, if both parents are living in the UK, or if one of the parents has sole custody. So what's happening is that her son is saying, "Mummy, just organize a plane and bring me over." And she can't do it. And she's fighting, but there's nothing she can do. And we have a government that is the most diverse in British history. And they are presiding over legislation and laws and policies that are separating mothers from their children, while taking the labor of women. I mean, Britain 2024. That's the Home Office, yeah? Where do we go? You're watching the Galley's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're watching live, remember to interact, as most of you have been doing. Give thanks. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share if you find the broadcast useful. The next section is going to look at some policing-related issues affecting our community around the UK. This is really a summary of everything that's been taking place over the last couple of weeks. I don't think we have many policing stories or direct policing stories this edition, thankfully. But let me keep going. Now, the first story you may recall, this is the story about Julian Cole. And I think we spoke about the 3 PCs involved in arresting him, who left him paralyzed and brain damaged. That they actually were sacked after being found guilty by a misconduct panel. So this is the good news. You know, this, I think we spoke about this. Just as a reminder for those of you who don't know, our brother Julian Cole was involved in a scuffle with doormen at this club. Police officers were, involved. This took place in 2013 in Bedford. They took him to the ground, and then 3 PCs, Oates, Kalyan, and Ross, cuffed him with his face down on the floor. And now he didn't die. Normally, we're used to the words positional asphyxia, which would lead him dead. But in this instance, what happened was that their attack left him with a broken neck and damage to his spinal cord, which caused brain damage due to the lack of oxygen. So he's paralyzed, right? He's permanently brain damaged. Now, the officers were sacked, but the reason they were sacked is because they were found to have lied in their statements about his condition during his arrest. Now, they said that he was able to walk into the police van, and that would have been the end of it. But in a strange twist of fate, the CCTV cameras that were there actually showed that he had to be carried with his legs dragging on the floor and his head hanging down. And so they were dismissed. They were found guilty of gross misconduct, and there's now been a payout. The payout, I think, £1.2 million to the family. That's not going to bring back the damage to his brain. That's not going to stop him being paralyzed. I mean, and I should also say that despite the payout, there's been no admission of liability. This is the Metropolitan Police, right? No admission of liability. So if that CCTV footage wasn't there, would the jury have believed the 3 police officers had lied? And I know this because this happened to me as a teenager. I say teenager, I was around 19 when I had to go to court, and police officers colluded and lied about me and tried to get me imprisoned. And it was only because I found a contradiction in their lies that I was able to reason it out and show that it was impossible for their statements all to be true. I had one of those duty solicitors. It wasn't very good. I had to do my own defense in the end. So this time we had CCTV working in our favor, but there's still been no admission of liability. I'm going to move on. It's just something to think about. Just a brief update. Most of you are familiar with the story of Chris Cabba, who was killed after a single gunshot from a Metropolitan Police officer in Streatham in 2022. There's been many campaigns and protests. The police officer's trial is to begin in October of this year. But what we now know is that there's going to be a lifting of the court order that said his identity would be kept secret, that he'd be anonymized. And that's going to take place. Right now, he's only known as NX121, but that's going to be lifted on the 1st of March. Now, we still don't know the name of the police officer who, and the undercover officer, I believe, who killed Rashawn Charles, but at least we'll know the name of the person who killed Chris Cabba. And just to remind you that this probably won't go without incident. If you may remember last September, that when it became clear that the officer was going to be named, that we saw many firearms officers who don't agree with the principle of open justice and police accountability lay down arms. It got to such a state that the police had to, or the government had to call in the army to cover for them. I remember putting in a freedom of request and a complaint into the police, and they've hidden behind rules to not deal with my complaint about them going on strike, because police officers are not allowed to go on strike. So I couldn't take the complaint any further. But watch this space, because I suspect when he's named, that some of these officers who don't agree with the idea of police accountability will be kicking up noise again. The next story, and if there's ever a case about why we need police accountability and transparency, is really there's an article that you may want to read. I call it the flaws of laws. That's my title, but really it's just about the people and the life who've been framed by DS, the Detective Sergeant or Superintendent, I don't know which one he is, Derek Ridgewell. Now, I just want to remind you all that the convictions of Celia Mehmet and Basil Peterkin, who are in the image on the screen, have been quashed posthumously. And that essentially I'm talking about meaning that they were convicted, charged, criminalized. They've now passed. They're no longer with us. And so they went and joined the ancestors with this stain against their name. It's being quashed now, but this is something that should never have happened. And the reason why I thought I'd come back to this story, even though I did mention the Oval 4 earlier, is because what we don't understand is how we found out, or many of us don't know how we found out about this. Because Ridgewell's conviction took place in 1980. He was charged, or he received a significant prison sentence for conspiracy to steal goods from a bricklayer's depot. Now, what should have happened once he was convicted is that the police should have then investigated his arrest record and all people who had been criminalized and gone to jail as a result of this investigation. But they didn't do that, right? So they convicted someone who had a history of stealing and of fraud and all this kind of stuff, but they didn't check the records. And so what happened, it was only after one of his victims listening to a radio call-in about miscarriages of justice on the LBC, kind of like mentioned his case, and someone on the panel said to him, well, why don't you try Googling DS Ridgewell? That the victim was shocked to discover that Ridgewell had been imprisoned for this, for an offence that was identical to the one that he had been convicted for. Now, if he hadn't have heard that show, he would never have been cleared. And if he hadn't been cleared, neither would have anyone else have been cleared. So I'm just trying to let you understand, when I talk about the flaws of laws, it's like this was just luck. This wasn't a justice system. The justice system had convicted innocent men. It had imprisoned innocent men. It had given, kind of like a carte blanche freedom to a corrupt police officer. I mean, eventually it did sentence him. But what's happened is that even those people, this is why I'm against the death penalty, right? I'm completely against the death penalty. That even though those people were innocent and they, released some of them, they passed away without having their names cleared. If this had been another crime and the death penalty had been in place, some people would have been murdered by the state. So I'm just going to leave that section on policing there. It's just something to think about. These are just ideological and intellectual and spiritual discussions that we need to have about these kind of topics. Okay, we're almost coming to the close of, quite a big program. So you're on watching Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're watching live, you know what to do: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Subscribe, like, share. Give us your thoughts, comments. I'm just going to talk about the health issues around the UK affecting our community. I think there's only a couple of stories this week. The first is, I'm not an expert on this. The first is about how NHS funding cuts are exacerbating inequalities in IVF outcomes, with African women being the brunt of that. And essentially what's happening is that because they're getting fertility treatment later, they're experiencing lower rates of success. And in many cases, they're being excluded altogether due to inaccurate metrics. Now, one of the things that you need to know with IVF outcomes is that age is a critical factor in the treatment success rate. The earlier you start, the better. The younger you are, the better the chance of success of this. But what's happened is that there are many issues, not just funding, societal issues, and it delays African women starting the process. So what we're seeing in many cases is that posters, medical literature are overwhelmingly depicting European families as the perfect candidates for IVF. We're seeing widespread negative stereotypes of African women. I don't want to go back, people saying that they're aggressive and all this kind of stuff, and just a generalized lack of support. And so what the research has shown essentially, and this is research from Oxford University, is that while the average IVF birth rate per embryo transfer has increased across all groups, African and Asian patients aged between 18 and 37 had the lowest birth rates compared to European patients. Now, this is research based on figures from 2021 or 2020 and 2021. It's just something to think about, how even simple things like this, the images in brochures perpetuate stereotypes, which puts us off looking for treatment. So it's not just IVF. We know this for cancer. We know this for diabetes. But this is what the research kind of like really hams home, let alone maternal death rates. The next, greetings, Sister Oleander.
Yes, we have a comment from Black History Walks. Winston True wrote a book on his life titled Black for a Cause, Not Just Because, in 2015, a great read on Black British civil rights.
Give thanks, Brother Tony. I mean, that's right. I forgot about that. Yes, Winston True did publish a book, and if you want to know more about it, please, check it out. We have people in our community who engage in activism. Civil rights didn't just start in America. That's one of the myths that really frustrates me. And Winston True is, despite being criminalized, he actually, he chronicled, he encoded, he stored his story in a book so that we can learn those lessons. And that's the one thing that we must do. There's one thing I'm guilty about. I haven't written a book about the things I've learned, and it's something I hope to find the time to do at some stage. But we must write down our history, we must write down our experiences, and we must also share with our community our successes as well as our failures so that we can learn from it, so that every generation isn't starting from scratch again. Okay, the next and final health slide is actually a positive one, really. I don't normally do first blacks. This kind of like, it's an obsession we have, which we had to sometimes move away from. It's useful, but not if it's just highlighting our exclusion from a system. Right? It's only useful when we have invented, when we are doing something. But in this particular case, I'm probably a bit biased because it's to do with sickle cell. And our sister, you can see her, Stephanie George from London. She was one of the first patients in the world to receive a blood matching genetic test at Whittingham Hospital in North London. Now, this new technology, this genotyping test, aims to better match patients' blood transfusions and reduce the risk of side effects. This is really important. I think I've spoken about sickle cell and how it works, and how there are many different therapies. But one of the therapies that happens is actually having blood transfusions, kind of like every 6 weeks. I mean, it's intensive. You can get iron overload, but also the risk of side effects of mismatches. So this is actually good news if it's improving the quality of those matches to reduce the level of side effects or the risk of side effects. It's worth knowing that there are an estimated around 18,000 patients living with sickle cell disorder and thalassemia in the UK right now, and now all of them are eligible for this accurate blood matching. So this is a good news story. So the final section of the program today is being positive. It's the good news section. Blah blah blah. Legali, Pan African Community News Update. Stuff live. If you've got something to say, you've probably got another 5-10 minutes to say it in. So please share. But I'm going to get on with it. Coming back to this same theme, the British Transport Police, they were responsible in the case of Winston True, have now launched a bursary for African law students and admitted systemic racism and Afrophobia. And I say Afrophobia, and I'll be very precise here. The Chief Constable Lucy D'Orsay said, and this is her exact words, "I'm sincerely sorry for the trauma suffered due to the criminal actions of former police officer DS Derek Ridgewell, who worked in the British Transport Police during the 1960s and 70s. In particular, it is of regret that we did not act sooner or end his criminalisation of British Africans, which led to the conviction of innocent people. We cannot undo the past, but we can learn from it. This is an important and somber point of reflection in our history. The British Transport Police is committed to combating racism, which includes Afrophobia, which led to those historic cases which targeted African youths and destroyed lives." Now, that's a remarkable statement to come from a chief constable. The sensitivity in recognizing Afrophobia is also to be credited, and actually recognizing that their officer criminalized innocent people. It wasn't just African people he was involved in criminalizing, but I found that very good. And also what I want to say on this particular thing, that not only is it good that there's a bursary for students of African heritage who are interested in law. I know there's been pushback against that, but we're living in the UK. No surprise there. But I also want to thank Winston True, and Quaker, who I respect, for following this all the way through. So I haven't heard the word Quaker here, but I remember it on the grapevine that there were people who were pushing and organising to make sure that bursary happened, and that it was focused on African people, and that they recognised Afrophobia. And it seems like in the statement that they have done so. So a lot of work is happening behind the scenes that we are unaware of, but we are slowly seeing progress. We are now developing a language, a conceptual framework that we can actually specifically talk about our problem. Anti-racism doesn't do it. Anti-racism talks about discrimination for everyone. Afrophobia talks about discrimination and hatred of people of African heritage. We have to be specific if we want positive outcomes. The next story, I've got to be careful that I'm not going to be advertising for like a multi-million pound organization, but it is a good piece of good news. There's 4 companies, the Gym Kitchen, Treasure Tress, Dalgety Herbal Teas, and Turmeric Co. 5 companies, and Loki, I think they're called, have each received 100 grand worth of TV advertising airtime and a bespoke TV advert through Channel 4, and a partnership they've done with Lloyds Bank they've got an initiative called Black in Business. And I spoke about this, I think, in the last program, the program before that, and the adverts have been running since the 15th of January. Now, I don't really watch much television, so it'd be nice if anyone's seen those adverts to give a heads up on whether they're any good. Hopefully they are. Apparently they've been made, with the businesses, so they're bespoke. They're not generic. Each 30-second commercial has the business founder alongside the comedian Judy Love, who was actually hilarious at times. This is taking place. This is I think it's a good news story, and I hope that it's not just like for 5 minutes. I hope that even though this is going to run from January to spring, that then they launch it again and find another 5 organizations. And I will say, I mean, I don't know all those organizations apart from one. I know Dalgety Herbal Teas. And yeah, I mean, they're the only ones. If you want a proper cup of like lemon and ginger and not that insipid thing that comes from Twinings, you had to go to Dalgety. It's just the truth there, man. You know, that has a fire in it. So yeah, good news. I think so anyway. This is what they should be contacting FB Comms for, by the reason. Marketing with love. This is another good news story. This one is for the former director of public health. His name is Ivan Brown, and he's decided to move from that sector to move to the same role, but for I can't never pronounce it. De Montfort. Is it De Montfort University? I've seen it written somewhere. I don't remember where it is. It's somewhere in the UK. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that he moved from working inside local government, I think it is, and to a university sector. And when he was asked whether he is expected to be in the position he is now, he responded, absolutely not. And I love that he was honest about that. He says that when I was about to leave school, my careers teacher told me very bluntly that the best I could hope for was to work in a factory, and he recommended that I go and work in a shoe and boot factory. So I love the fact that he's been honest, because that's the same experience I had. I'm working at a UCL, I'm working at a university as a lecturer. I didn't expect to be here. I was a musician, a computer programmer, and when I left secondary school, I wasn't encouraged to go to university. In fact, I was put off going to university by some of the teachers there. They thought I was always having fights. Unfortunately, I didn't like bullies, so I'd always end up in some kind of scuff. So he's making this move, and I just love it's a positive story. The reason why I put the other image, which is about every year spent in university improves life expectancy, is because it's important for us to also know that there was a piece of research in the Lancet Public Health Journal, and this is a peer-reviewed journal. Unfortunately, it's not easy to access, but it kind of brought out this information, which is really important, which I wish that more of us knew about this sort of stuff, about completing primary, secondary, and tertiary education. So education at college, sixth form, and university actually is the equivalent of a lifetime of eating a healthy diet, and it lowers the risk of death by 34% compared with those with no formal education. Now, this is not to say that you have to go to school to have a healthy life, and it's not to say that those who go to school there's something wrong with them, but this is just a really strong piece of research that's saying that the longer that you're in school, the longer you're in education, the more that you learn, that there's actually now objective evidence showing that the risk of death is reduced by 34%. In fact, they go as far as saying that every year spent at school, or every year not spent at school is as deadly as smoking or heavy drinking. Now, this is the first systemic study looking at this link between education and longevity. So, two stories conflated, one based on analysis and fact, the other one anecdotal based on someone's life experiences, but put that together. And it says we have to keep our children learning. We have to encourage them to go into school, to go into college, to go into university, because it actually is not only just opening up their possibilities for their life course, for their livelihoods, but it's actually helping their lives and how long they live for. I mean, this is a really important piece of research, and when I get a chance, I'm going to finish reading the whole thing. I've only scanned it. Sister Oleander.
Yes, so we have a comment from FP Comms. This is great to see this here. There is a scaling consideration to discuss for the businesses that win this opportunity, but this story made me smile. And I agree, Dalgety is also the tea of choice.
Thank you. I think we're talking about the advertising campaign, the finance for the 5 African heritage organizations. Yes, and definitely. And just as well as anyone's out there as well, I mean, FB Comms, it's an amazing marketing organization. I mean, that tagline is important. And I say that not just because I'm just kind of like trying to curry favor, but I've actually worked with Sister Nicola in the past, and I know I've been a stranger while I've been caught up and locked in the ivory towers. But when I was actually working on my film Beauty Is, the support I got from FB Comms and the encouragement meant the world. So thank you. And it really makes a difference to work with organizations that actually get us, that understand us. I'm sure Channel 4 and Lloyds Bank mean well. I'm sure it's somewhere on their diversity checklist of things to do. But if we want to see sustainable change, like I said, that initiative is just going to stop in spring, and it's going to be for us to say, well, do it again and again and again and again. You know, we shouldn't need to tell anyone that. And I love the fact that we have people in our community who just do it anyway. So give thanks.
And then I've got another comment from No Name. Thank you for this new news program, Brother Toyin, Dr. Brother Toyin. Not sure why it is not more widely advertised.
Give thanks, No Name, and I appreciate the kind words. You know what it is? It's the way social media, way the media works right now. I'm supposed to turn myself into a brand. I'm supposed to go out and share and dance and put something out every day, and I'm just unwilling to do that. So this program really is for those who are interested. It's also an archive, so that when I'm an ancestor, you know, people can see what was happening. You know, the way Legali worked back in the day when we had our own forms, our own control. We would produce things, and the people who liked what we did, they would share it. And I'm happy with that. If people don't want to share, they don't want to share. But you know what? It's you know, the model I sometimes think of is the Radio 4 model in the UK. So Radio 4 and The Guardian, to the same extent, they have very small audiences, very, very small audiences. But the people in power, they listen to that program every single morning. They read those bylines every single day. So when they go out into the world, they're fully armed. They know exactly what's taking place. They know exactly what their position is on it. And the rest of us, when we're waking up, Channel 4, you know, Radio 4 program's finished, and they've already started putting policies in place. And I've always had a vision and a belief that a community becomes mature when it has its own daily newspaper. That's when we know a minority community has landed, when it's able to produce not a weekly newspaper, a daily newspaper, and constantly updates the community on the threats, the opportunities, the successes, you know, the tragedies, everything. You know, and with the internet, with the YouTube, we can do that. But unfortunately, we're not. So, you know, for me, I'm just doing my little piece in this corner. I can't even do it all year round. I had to finish it at the end of this term, but hopefully someone else will carry on the baton. So, I mean, I know it's a long answer, and you just made a kind comment, but it's just something I always like to share, because we've got to keep passing the baton. We're all in this together. So, yeah, I'm going to move on to the last couple of stories. The first is that there's going to be an Easter market in Rochester on on the Saturday, the 30th of March, 2024. So if you need gifts for family, friends, loved ones, there's going to be clothes, music, jewelry, books, and more available for you to purchase. So if you're in Rochester, give them some support. Even if you're not, if you're nearby, drop by and give them some support. You know, I don't know much when it comes to economic development. That's not me. I'm community development when it comes to politics and culture and spirituality, but economics is really important. And I know that, you know, if you don't want to get involved in all the messy stuff that I get involved in, then just go and shop and buy from our community, because that helps us to fight another day. And the next event really I'm going to talk about is the Glimpse Festival. Now, registration is now open. It's the first international African speculative writing festival. Now, speculative writing is another way, or fancy way of saying sci-fi and future visioning. And it's a 3-day in-person festival. It's going to celebrate British and international speculative writers from our community. It's going to be held at Goldsmith University. That's in London, for those of you who don't know, from February the 2nd to the 4th. It's the first of its kind. It's been founded by our sister, the amazing Dr. Khadija Cisse. She's a writer, a literary activist. She first commissioned Glimpse, the book that you can see on the screen, which was the first speculative fiction anthology by British Africans in 2022. I keep saying, whenever I want to say anthology, I say anthropology, because I'm an anthropologist, but it's anthology. I'm actually going to be there on one of the days. I'm chairing, I think, on Saturday. I'm an awful chair. I don't know why she wants me to chair. So you are welcome to come and listen to me talking to some amazing authors for one of the chairs. But I'm going to be nerding out on Saturday. So once I've done that cheer, and I'll be checking every single panel before I make my way home. But it's this weekend coming. It's like, don't know what else to say other than that, really. Yeah. And I think there's only one more slide. Oh, yes, I was going to do this thing, wasn't I? I did say that some weeks we'd have this opinion piece. I think this program's gone on for so long, I can't really extend this opinion piece for that long. Because I sometimes like to wrap up what's taking place and an idea. We haven't got a lot of time. What I will say is that right now we are, it's an opinion, it's my opinion. So it's kind of like, do you remember that awful Jerry Springer, Jerry's Corner, or what? I forgot what it was called. Like, this is Toyin's Corner, you know what I mean? The Agbetu piece. I haven't figured out what I call it. But I've called it the death of the rules-based order, or, you know what I mean? And this is just me being a bit, mischievous here. Most of you will know that this week there was a ruling from the International Court, a Justice Court, and it ruled that there's a case to answer for genocide. It hasn't ruled on it. That it's going to take years before they make a judgment, which is really frustrating because that's another problem with the system. But it has said that Israel has to stop anything that kind of like promotes or incites genocide, and anything that causes genocide, and or that it does that's causing genocide. So this is a good thing. But the reason why I thought about this topic, about this rules base, because two things happened this week. So today there was a story, I think it's been put together led by Donkeys. It's a really amazing activist group who kind of like do these stunts with projectors, and they project kind of like really good mini documentaries onto the House of Parliament and stuff like that. And they've exposed the fact that the UK is saying that it's going to fly migrants back to, and asylum seekers to Rwanda, and they've been fighting, saying that it's a safe place to send asylum seekers. But what this research has found out was actually at the same time that the UK was saying that Rwanda was safe to send back people, it was also admitting and taking and granting refugee status to people because it said that their fears of persecution in Rwanda were well founded. So what I'm trying to say is that they're talking out both sides of their mouth. They're saying on one level, we're going to scrap human rights law so that we can actually send people who are persecuted and running for their life back, to Rwanda. I shouldn't say back, to Rwanda. And on the other side, and so they're saying that we've just passed law, and it's going through the House of Commons, that says that Rwanda is a safe country. But at the same time, another part of the government is saying, we know that you're at risk, we're going to grant you refugee status. Now, people don't know about the granting of refugee status, while in the public, this is why populism works. You've got people like Rishi Sunak saying, we're going to stop the boats, and part of our strategy is to deterrent, and we're saying that the British public want us to send them to Rwanda. This is the myth. That's story one. Or story two. So the whole thing about the International Court of Justice ruling against Israel, or recognizing it as a case for genocide. There is more about that, with Britain and America bombing the Houthi in Yemen, putting a target on those of us that live in the UK through its actions, because now the UK and the US are supporting those genocidal acts. That's another discussion for another day, because the reason why I can say that is because if you see the picture of David Lammy was talking at an event recently, and some protesters came up and stopped him, saying that they've got blood on their hands, and they shouldn't be supporting this attack on Palestinians. They should be looking to make sure that there's a ceasefire. And he ran away the first time the protesters came. Then they took the protesters off, and another protester came. He ran away, and another protesters came, and then finally, when the protesters were all ejected from the venue, which was a place of Labour, I forgot the name of the organisation, Labour, kind of like campaigners. He made this rant. Well, not a rant. He started laughing at them, and he said, "Change comes through power, not protest." And when I saw the clip of him saying that, it vexed me. So it vexed me, because he's now propelling this idea that power, which he hasn't got, he's this shadow foreign officer, foreign minister, whatever he'll call himself. He's proposing this idea that only these elite, that these highly educated politicians, these special people can actually bring about change, and that protest has no place in bringing about change. And when I think about Sojourner Truth, Amilcar Cabral, Mami Amagay, Walter Rodney, Olive Morris, Fela Kuti, Nana Zante, Olado Criano, Margaret Busby, Sam Sharp, Winston True, Nat Turner, Alethea Jones-LeConte, Sister Dr. Sandra Richards, Bobby Ed Benner, Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, Mavis Bess, Claudia Jones. I can go on and on and on. There are people, ancestors still with us, who have an amazing amount of power, who have used protest, who've used activism to make some amazing contributions to us all. And so when this boy here is saying change comes through power, not protest, and in November, he's going to run around with that Starmer boy telling us that our power comes through the vote them. Gosa. So, just keep an eye, because there's going to be a lot of politics this year, a lot of politics. Because the program's been going on for too long, I'm going to leave it there, because this is a debate. Maybe we need a program where we just have our own question time, like a debate of these things, because I kind of really want to go into it. But okay, I know this is a slide Sister Oleander wants to see. I am teasing. We're coming to the end of the program, and we should be back on, I'm going to say Sunday, because I keep trying Monday, but what happens is work gets in the way, and I get meetings and stuff, and I'm tired by the time I get home. So I'll keep it to Sunday, but it means I lose my Sundays. I didn't even see a whole Columbo episode today. I'm so vexed. We'll be back on Sunday, the 11th of February, 2024. Again, apologies for not being able to reply to all queries. The good news is that I have finished a whole truckload of marking. They just about finished them. So this week, I'm going to start catching up with some of those emails. So people who haven't seen or heard from me, you're going to start hearing response. I know some of those emails will be a few months old, but I do get back to everyone. I have said that my capacity to do community work this year is going to be diminished, as I want to finish some existing projects and engage with research. There's the film about love. There's my thesis. There's the documentary about activism. I need to finish them. I need to do some more writing. So you won't see me around as much, but we'll be here. And Sister Oleander, anything you want to say?
Yep. So we have a few comments. FPCom says, Lamy, my Guyanese is not great with public questioning. You just have to look at his performance on Mastermind. I'm sure he regretted his statement. And she follows on with, I really wanted to say he's not the smartest tool in the box.
Ooh, well, you said it, not me. At least his name's not Cleverly. There's an irony in being called named Cleverly and not actually being, but some people will say I'm doing a James O'Brien, so I don't want to do that.
Okay.
They're our brothers, they're misguided, they're problematic, but give thanks.
And then we have a comment from N saying, yes, debate brother, love this concept, Asante Sana.
Oh, give thanks. Well, I'll tell you what I might do. I'm going to do an open classroom in March. An open classroom, I'll promote it in the next program, is where I take one of my classes, which is Decolonizing Anthropology this term, and we host it in Hackney, it's the community centre, the IDPAD centre. This is the last year for IDPAD, actually, formally, 2024. We'll review that. So, I'll open it up so people can come down. And so there'll be the lecture, the classroom. But I am thinking, and we are playing with the idea of showing a film after the open classroom, which you'll be invited to attend. But, the idea of a debate, I think we do need to have that. I know there's something taking place in Rich Mix. I've forgotten what it's called, the Uppity Club or something like that. I think my brother Nels Abbey does... he picks topical debates and stuff like that. But we need something a bit more routine that happens more regularly and is open to more of us. But
Okay.
thank you for being with
So
us. I think that's probably one of the longest programs. Sister Oleander, you're going to say something? I thought I heard
oh
you.
yeah. Oh no, I was just gonna say. So what I want to say, because I had to read out those comments, is thank you. Give thanks everybody for your comments and queries today. Really appreciate that. And as they say, walk good. And yeah, just look forward to the next round of storms that's coming around to us. Blow out all the rubbish that's happening right now.
Let's hope. Let's hope. It was nice looking up at the moon yesterday, so let's hope.
Yeah,
You know.
it was.
So yeah, this is unfortunately. This is, well, I say unfortunately. This is a bit longer than usual. We're trying to actually get the program shorter, believe it or not. It's supposed to be like an hour, 90 minutes maximum. But sometimes a lot of things come in, and sometimes I talk too much. So my apologies for that. But thank you for staying with us. And as Sister Oleander said, walk good, be safe, and as ever, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.